This week, the Valor Flight Crew Podcast welcomes Bryan Evans to discuss safety deviation.
We're more concerned about our feelings, our crew members' feelings, our patients' feelings, rather than looking at this from an objective 30,000-foot view of, is this the right thing in the right situation at the right time? And I hope that everyone out there that's listening to this does feel empowered enough to raise that question and make that decision when something really doesn't feel right.
Welcome back to the Valor Flight Crew Podcast, hosted by Echo and brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and Valor Plus. What really makes strong safety culture? In this episode, we sit down with helicopter air ambulance leader Bryan Evans to explore the everyday choices, conversations, and behaviors that shape safer operations. From normalized deviations and accountability to psychological safety and leadership, Bryan shares real-world lessons and practical strategies for building a more resilient culture. Whether you're a pilot, clinician, mechanic, communicator, or leader, this episode will challenge the way you think about safety and your role in creating it. Thank you to our sponsors, Airbus, Metro Aviation, and Precision Aviation Group.
Welcome to the Valor Flight Crew Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast, produced in partnership with Echo, Every Coast Helicopter Operations. The Valor Flight Crew Podcast promotes the personnel and life-saving equipment behind helicopter air ambulance services. Join hosts Mike Fadale and Blake Shrider for in-depth interviews and expert insights from air medical personnel, pilots, communication specialists, and maintenance crews who play critical roles in airborne emergency response.
Line 1 accepting.
Copy, line 1, gotcha, accepting. You're going to be talking to Red Feather 1 on LCEMS.
We're more concerned about our feelings, our crew members' feelings, our patients' feelings, rather than looking at this from an objective 30,000-foot view of, is this the right thing in the right situation at the right time? And I hope that everyone out there that's listening to this does feel empowered enough to raise that question and make that decision when something really doesn't feel right. And I hope that every single person that's listening out there has a leadership team that is willing to listen to them, because I agree that this is something that absolutely has to go both ways, and that we can't continue to accept our little variances from what the norm should be. That's just not okay. And I guess I'm curious, from your point of view then, Bryan, do you feel that this accountability that we have, so who has the higher accountability at the end of the day? Do you feel that that comes more from the leadership perspective, or do you feel that that's more on the crew perspective? Where does that accountability meter land between those two?
Yeah, I think it almost kind of varies depending on what lens you're looking at it through. The one thing before I forget, that I want to come back to is, what you were saying, Mike, reminds me a lot of something that I've heard people talk about too, is we often talk frequently without question about what went wrong and what we didn't get right. How often do we talk about what did go right? And, I have a dozen ways that somebody on the front line could tell us what went wrong, report a problem, et cetera.
Yeah.
They're going to have to look through a lot of layers to find that one opportunity to be able to report hey, this guy did a really good job this day. Thank God she was my partner today. She really spoke up for this. But so I think where my mind naturally goes to, Mike, is, if it goes wrong, where are people going to start looking first? And I think that's kind of where I go at ultimate responsibility. And when something goes wrong, the masses at large are going to look at leadership and say, how could you let this happen? But I think those that are closer to it know that there is a lot more onus, and it will be more successful with ownership if you are the biggest advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that advocacy is so key in this.
Yeah, Russell. I think he was the one that said safety champion recently on his discussion with you, and that was, we've got a safety chair, we've got safety councils, got people for safety, but that is as nuanced as it can be. That really does, if safety advocate, safety champion. I think just those little things are just one more opportunity to just maybe train our brains to view it a little bit differently. And does that help disrupt the normalization deviance? We went back to walk arounds, and if you do your walk around the same way you've done it the last 15 years, are you really doing an effective walk around? Or it's like,
Right, exactly.
You write an email or write a paper and you proofread it and it was perfect, and then you come back and say, well, that's not what I wrote. Well, no, it is what you wrote.
Right.
Your mind just saw it the way you've done it and read it 20 times over. It's, same theory to walk around. So I think that's, when we think again about what we can do differently is, how do we kind of trick our brain? How do we, break that norm of and shake things up a little bit?
But Brian, I think a very valid, I don't know if a solution, but maybe a step in the right direction is exactly what you said. We don't talk about a lot of the things that we get right a lot, and I think, being, I identify as human. We get so afraid, like there's always this worry, right? And I think if you ask anybody in EMS or HEMS, pilots, whatever, you ask like, why? I just don't want to get in trouble, right? I don't want to do something wrong. And there's always like a consequence. There's always this like, well, if I do this, this may happen. And so naturally you kind of have this mindset of, well, I just got to do all these things because I don't want to get in trouble. And, and I think inherently as humans, we naturally in this job, we do things for the right reasons, because we want to get it right and we want to do it to help people. But I think when it comes to these nuances, the things that we can do to make us safer, whether it be processes, attitude, all these different things, if we were to really highlight more often, I think the things that we do right and the positive effects that come from that, maybe that's a step in the right direction to our brains now switch, instead of worried about what could go wrong and how I would get in trouble, to, hey, I was able to bring up something that I saw and it worked out that we were able to make a great change and nothing had happened. It wasn't till it didn't come forward because of an event. We were able to bring it forward because it was identified. I, at the crew level, found something, brought it to my leadership, and from the leadership level, brought it to everybody, and we're able to make a change. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, that sounds like a good way to maybe shift that mindset, to have to maybe interrupt, maybe so to speak, that normalization of deviance. Like maybe that's a way to stop or interrupt that process, and it retrains us to think that it's okay. I can bring this forward because I know that I don't have to have the right answer, but maybe I can bring up this thing that I saw. Like you said, if I start my walk around on the left side of the aircraft, I close the pilot door, I make sure the crew door, and I go around. What if I just started every other day? I went opposite, right? Or I did something to just interrupt that kind of flow, but it keeps my attention in the right, frame of mind, to where you don't see the same thing. It's not Groundhog Day, right? The same thing day after day. I don't know. To me, that sounds like a great way to help this process along, to make it more positive, and where people will speak up and good things happen, and not just worry about the bad things.
I think this topic epitomizes any little thing that changes it just in the most minuscule way can matter. Like I imagine a lot of agencies out there participate in the kind of prom promise, every 15-minute mock crash programs at the high schools every year. And ever since I've been involved with those, even like kind of before HEMS, being involved in the fire and EMS and planning those events, everybody involved in that process truly means if that all that work coordination for those programs makes a difference to just one student that day, it is absolutely truly worth it. And I think that has a lot of similarities to this of, what changes my brain or my frame of thinking and reference versus yours versus Mike's. It could all be different, and it might, Mike might, giggle and shrug his shoulders at, what you thought helped you be more safe at work, whereas it's going to be something that you're going to think about every day, every time you come to work for the next decade.
Yeah.
And I really like where we're going with this. And then this is obviously conversations that we've kind of talked about and touched upon in prior episodes as well. I think back to talking about debriefs with Sean Gavin. I think about conversations we've had with Russell and some of the others talking about safety, and even taking it into like on a personal level in the conversation that we had about precepting new employees with Zane Atencio. I think back to when you're forced to sit down and think about what you did right or what you did well in that situation, that's often the harder thing to do. It's easy to identify all the things that went wrong. It's easy to talk about all of that stuff that didn't go the way you wanted it to when you talk about taking care of that patient or about the transport. I find it's easy to talk about those things. But when I have to sit there and think about what I did well, because a lot of us just look at it at the end of the day of saying, well, that's just my job, right? Like, that's just what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
But I think that we need to reinforce these positive concepts. And I think that we need to identify at least a couple of things on each of these transports that we do, whether that be from an aviation perspective or from a care perspective or a communication perspective. I don't care what it is. I think that we need to identify things that were positive that made that transport go well and reinforce those in a different way. Because I think reinforcing the positive, if all we do is focus on the negative, that's all we're ever going to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to push ourselves further from a safety perspective, because we're just going to say, well, no, don't do that. But what should we do instead? What did we do that made this better? And I think that's where we need to shift those. And I try to do that with, any of the debriefs that I have, both, on the medical and aviation side of things, and try to remember to ask that question. But I think that's the hard one that we oftentimes forget about. And I don't know how to reframe that thinking. I really don't. I don't know. If you have any ideas, please share with the class, because
you've got to have something. You've got to have something.
I think it gets even worse too, depending on, or more challenging, not worse, depending on how some programs are structured. So my program currently, as it sits today, is 4 helicopter bases and then a ground base, and everybody rotates through at least 2 of the bases and the ground base. Now, it might be rather infrequently, but everybody rotates a little bit. So it's different than a lot of places, I think, in the industry where it's the same group all the time. So, not only do we have to celebrate those successes, but we've got to find ways to cascade that information across, 90, 80 people working 24/7, 365, spread out across multiple locations. So, I think we've made a little bit, I mean, this is not industry groundbreaking by any stretch, but maybe it'll have an impact for somebody, so I'll share it. But we started adding, our health system uses mission moments kind of as their recognition. And it's exactly what Mike said of, you'll hear other mission moments from throughout the organization, and you're like, well, that's what our guys do before they even, our guys and girls do before they even have breakfast. Like, this is an annual celebration accomplishment. And so I think that leads to us naturally taking some of that for granted. But we've tried both at the team level and the system level. We're calling more attention to those. We added it, as simple as it sounds, to our daily huddle template, every morning, where we're, recognizing people. And it has definitely, we're not perfect. There's still too many, days in a month where there's not something new there for a couple days in a row. But it absolutely has, I have definitely seen an increase of people being like, hey, I want to mention my partner, or I heard about this call at shift change. Did you hear about what Mike and Blake did on this call? Like, it was unreal. So
that would probably be true.
Maybe not in the frame that they were bringing it. It may not be a mission moment. It may be a memorable, or might be that new policy.
Yeah. Guaranteed.
Yeah, 100%. But and I think that as we have this conversation, I could just think of when I'm headed into work tomorrow. I know that I'm gonna have to be like, all right, man, do the right thing. And it's not that like I show up and I do the wrong thing, right? But it's like really be deliberate and see it through, right? See the process. I know I'm going to have a trainee tomorrow. which I thoroughly enjoy because it keeps me honest and it keeps me whole, because I know that, like, as much as I try to prep for the questions that are going to come, as much as I want to have the answers, I get really good at, like, well, let's see what the book says, let's check the guidelines, that's a great question. I just feel like if I can just make, like you said, those small differences, those small changes, and see it through, like sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but there's a reason why that process is in place, or, whatever it is, there's a reason behind it. Probably that's why most policies are written, right? Because along the way, somebody did something that we needed to write a policy for.
Don't be the reason.
Don't be the reason today.
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
I think, though, in that same light, what if, do our policies match our process, or does our process match our policies? Like, I think when I think about the task saturate, we were recently talking about our health system merged with another health system, and we're looking at in the future growing to be a 9 helicopter program. And, through some of that, we were talking about different things, looking at system, different, who uses what system and some of that kind of stuff. And, it's like every day, if I'm one of my, and again, I'm the one that essentially is setting that this should all be done. But, the schedule's in one system, the charting's in one system. You're going to look at Epic to get your information and the interfacility to put it into the charting system. You're going to go over here to this system where the chart got sent for your QA. By the way, you've got to do your hospital education in this system. You've got to do your aviation partner education in this system. Like, at what points does that task saturation come into it? So, I use that in the same thing of like, does the process really make sense? Like, we absolutely need policies. We need checklists. But I think one of the reasons you can start to see the drift or the normalization that we talk about is that we have policies that don't match the process. And if we can take a harder look at some of those, and I mean, if any of my team listens to this, they'll probably be having some choice words for me, because they'll be like, "Yo, you tell the rest of the country we could change this, but what are we doing? What are we doing under our own roof, bro?" But I don't know. They call me bro, but in my mind they do. So
I like it.
But are we doing the job that we need to do in that regard? To be able to. Are those some of those little things that we could cut out, that if we remove some of that, we're going to get better compliance, and we're going to get better buy-in at whatever it is along the way?
That's a very great point. And I think right now, anybody listening, if you were to take a shot for every type of different system that you had to go into to do
so bad.
But it's the truth, though. It is absolutely the truth. And it's like, we expect policies and procedures to be there, but then we put all of these barriers in place that don't allow them to happen.
Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we do this? And I think we joke about this a lot, because we're like, man, that was someone's, like, before they retired, that was their lasting gift that they were leaving, was like, what, I'm going to create this, and then I'm out.
Drop.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, obviously, I think a lot of it comes from the most well-intended purpose, but I think we should look at it and be like, hey, you know what, that kind of sucks, or that's very tedious, and maybe that is too cumbersome and it's not realistic. And I think, Bryan, that is such a great concept. And I hope for people listening, may or may not be my programs, hey, man, maybe we could tweak that a little bit, or we have a lot of processes for this policy or whatever, I don't know. But I think if we could acknowledge
your optimism
and I know it's the subtle jabs I throw out there.
Yes.
Maybe we can improve those things. And I think, Bryan, that's a great concept. It's like, well, why don't we get the compliance? That's another word people love. Why don't I get compliance? Well, because I have to jump through. First of all, I have to have like 4 single sign-ons, and I have to change my password every 30 days, and then I can't remember the one, and then I can't use one of the same 7 passwords that I had to be able to log into this thing. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to email it to myself and put it in this way. So there you go.
Yeah, no, and any of us in leadership know that despite our, best intentions or what our leadership philosophies may be, like there's no doubt we all on a somewhat routine basis, probably more than we would like, solve a problem by making 12 other problems, 12 other problems along the way. I think though that for those, we have a very robust shared governance process that we're very proud of and that is, constantly growing. I think that's common in a lot of places in the industry, but not in others. But I think that's why it's so important for that model, so that there is a voice, that people aren't there being like, this process does not work for us. This bag does not work for us, but they don't feel like they have a mechanism to take it back, to be able to like even introduce the idea of can we consider something else. And even those that I think one of the links for some of us might be a little bit different for Mike's program than Blake for you or I is, then where's the level of between, if you're aviation, if you're not Part 135, if you have an aviation partnership, your pilots and your maintainers have a different, in theory, reporting structure than the clinical crews do, and so safety reporting can be in different systems. Do those systems, is there a mechanism somewhere where we make sure that if it gets in one, somebody on the other, I don't like saying that, but that it crosses over. But like I debate this, and we've talked about this for a couple of years. Like, do our line pilots really have the voice to be able to say, like, this ops council keeps buying new bags, but obviously we all joke about bags. We had ops council yesterday.
It's Blake's favorite topic.
I'm twitching right now.
We're not doing a bag survey, but there might be a new module coming, and it's not for me. I just want to throw that out there. But like, we've talked about it, that group of like, we'll be like, we'll get the greatest idea in the world, we'll buy it, we'll roll it out. And now the first time somebody walks out with it and the pilot's looking at us like, what are you guys doing here? Like, we've got to recalculate CG, you've got to reconfigure a program. And like, even with the best intentions, there's just times where you overlook that. And so, we've been talking recently about how do we make sure that everybody at every phase has that voice to be able to say like, can we take a step back when we get excited about a new project and initiative and be like, all right, I know this may seem simple, it's a bag, but let's bring all the stakeholders together and be like, okay, maintenance, do we have a way to secure this? Oh, we're going to hang we just had this discussion yesterday with maintenance. Oh, we're going to, hang a 30-pound object from something that's supposed to hold a coat. Yeah, we probably need to look at a different way of securing this. But, in the hustle and bustle and everything, great intentions. And we start to overlook that at times.
But I think what we've been talking about the past couple of minutes is kind of the epitome of where we need to, or maybe this is ground zero of where we need to examine these processes, and that we expect safety culture to occur. We expect people to step up. We expect people to do walkarounds. We expect them to do all of these different things. But then we never look at the factors that are preventing them from doing those things. So if I'm going to create a new policy, if I'm going to, initiate, if I'm going to bring in a new bag, right? Like I need to break down the barriers that are preventing these things from happening. And so I think that is so important with safety culture, in that if we are expecting someone to be safe, if we are expecting someone to speak up, that we need to do a better job of breaking down those barriers for them to do that. And that, I think, is where the core of the culture comes in, at least in my head. And I'm please feel free to agree to disagree or lead me in a different direction talking about that. But I feel like that's where the core of the culture is in taking down enough barriers so that safety culture can occur, but keeping enough there that keeps people accountable.
I don't know that anybody could sum it up better than that.
Do we examine those processes on a regular basis to make sure they are working for us? Or is this just how we've always done it and we're stuck in that way?
I think we all are guilty of that from time to time. And again, another one of those chalk it up is more frequently than I'd like to admit. And then, again, how do we use forums like these where we're, at industry events talking with peers to be able to bring, recognition to, we're all like, everybody loves these ideas. Like probably nobody's going to go, very few people, hopefully, are going to go back to their organizations. It's going to be like, no, it's an awful idea. We should not re-examine if what we're doing makes sense. Like the vast majority of people and organizations are going to be down for that. And how do we build that into, are we looking at stuff, do we say, okay, once a year, we're going to do policy review. We're going to do a policy review, one every month, but even that, how many policies do we have? How long is it going to take us to be able to get through?
How many hundreds of policies do we have?
It'd take you 10 years to go over all of it.
So what's a practical way to be able to do that? Can we do surveys? Like, can we do an annual safety survey of our program? Say, hey, we want your feedback. What's working? What's not working? What's an opportunity that you think we've had? Have you brought something forward that, you felt was important and it's not been, it doesn't have resolution now? The loop closure thing is something, back to that similar point about people being spread out across multiple locations. How do we make sure everybody gets the message and we close the loop on that? I think that's a thing on culture that I know personally I can always be better at. But when you think about like what makes culture, closing the loop, like there's nothing like ruining somebody wanting to be able to speak up, that they bring something up and they hear nothing back about it.
Yep. Man, that that hits. and not because it happens, because I feel like in my own aspect, I've had people ask me, or, hey, what do you think of this? I'm like, man, that's a great question. Let me look into it. And then I just get so busy, or, and it's my own doing of just being like, man, I wasn't really focused on that, So I don't know, Bryan, what can I do to make myself better when not only I recognize something, a behavior, a process, whatever it is, what can I do from a crew level perspective? How can I start that process? And maybe, I don't know if this is a tougher question of like, and it's more than just speaking up, but like, what's the next step? Because I feel like predominantly for most programs, people are able to at least speak up or have an avenue to report something, but what's the step after that? So if I've brought it forward and let's say that you do hear something back, but it's just kind of hanging in limbo or whatever. Like, so what can I do, or anybody else listening as from the crew level, what can you do to keep it moving forward or keep it highlighted to make sure a behavior or something doesn't get overlooked or missed?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Vaguely post about it on social media.
Step one.
Yeah, I think you have to be comfortable. We always have this comfortable, uncomfortable, but you have to be, we have to design the system so that if there's not resolution, somebody could say, bring it up again, or maybe it's something, that we're going to revisit. I think coming forward solutions oriented is always, it's easy, it's easy for all of us to say what's wrong, but there's not always a fix. And I think we could all do more of, somebody may bring something to me, I can't wrap my brain around it, don't have a great idea jumping out, but the person it's been weighing on, that's been thinking about all the time, may have a lot of great ideas. But again, do we promote that open discussion? I think it's also easy just because we all have bosses, as bosses and in leadership, there may be things that we're, I'm not talking like ethically, but there may be something that I may agree on, something that I want to buy, that I want to invest in, but it's just not practical right now. I just can't do it. So I think that we can all at times be bad about just throwing our arms up, like, so just because we heard no once or it didn't work out at that one particular time doesn't mean that 6 months later we shouldn't be like, hey, we've been able to overcome this and this in this time frame, so they were bigger priorities at the time. Can we open this discussion back up? But I think that all of us, not just throwing our arms up and being able to course correct and come back to it is important. And I think that absolute ownership too, for, you said individually, you talked before about, you're going to work tomorrow and, the little pep talk that you give yourself, like, what are we doing when no one's watching? I think that's what really defines for each of us when we take it back to, our why, that, I need to be my own advocate. And what am I doing when nobody's watching?
Yeah. And this was a similar concept that we ended up talking about in one of the other podcasts with Russell. And it's like, when nobody's looking, are you still doing the right thing? Or are you cutting corners? And that's a personal thing that you need to look into. But I think that's not just a personal thing. That's an organizational thing too. Like that goes beyond just the individual. And we all need to make sure that we're holding each other accountable. And I think that brings in the whole crew dynamics aspect of it too, right? Like how does this culture safety change when now you start focusing on the crew level as opposed to the individual level? Because I think that's a huge dynamic in and of itself. Like that's a whole other piece of this puzzle that we sometimes don't really take into account. And while we've kind of scratched the surface, I think, of some of it earlier, talking about not wanting to let our partners down, not wanting to let our patients down, those kind of things, are there other crew dynamics that really tend to shape what this overall culture looks like, and how do we maintain that positive culture within some of those crew dynamics that may not always be the best?
Yeah, I think I did a thing for the future flight leaders last year on some communication was the topic that I was gifted. So thanks to Hamilton and Cohen out there. I don't know that it was the most
everyone's favorite topic.
I don't know that it was the most engaging topic I could have been awarded, but it ended up being, even just preparing for that as I was kind of doing some research and going through stuff, it made you made you think, but you have to we keep going back to that comfort and, your reason, is you letting your partner that maybe not be the most ambitious take that shortcut every time, rubber stamping the chore of the day, the daily checklist. Like, are you doing them a service? Are you doing their patients a service? Yeah. Are you doing yourself a service? Are you, what matters more? Is it, that kind of couple minutes of a grown up, like, hey man, we got to talk. Like, I've really noticed that, we're skipping some steps here. And, I think this is why it's important. And we're in the industry, we're empowered that you may be landing on a highway, half rappelling down a mountainside to RSI somebody trapped in a car. You're there for 3 hours and you come back and we can't have a simple conversation like, hey, you're kind of a slob every day that I come in to relieve you and I'm sick of it. Like, where if we can be empowered and we can successfully accomplish the first part of that, I'm very confident that we can have that second part of it. But we laugh because we all know it's happening every day. We can all think of our own. And again, we've all done that. I think I think that comes with, kind of time where you start to get more comfortable with some of those types of things.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It's crazy because we're so like we deal with confrontation every single day. We go to that referring facility and maybe the physician isn't happy with what we're doing, and we have to deal with that confrontation and be able to have those conversations and maintain that customer service that goes along with it, and still take care of the patient and multitask this incredibly complex situation that's in front of us from many levels. And we come back to base and we can't have a simple conversation about why something is bothering us, right? Like those, and I get it. We want to make sure that we're spending 12 or 24 hours with this person, sometimes maybe longer, right? We want it to be a positive experience. We want it to work well for the team. We want to make sure that everybody likes each other and goes home happy at the end of the day. But I think we either keep our mouths shut sometimes because we are afraid of what the other person is going to think of us, or we're too afraid about making them unhappy that we deal with being unhappy ourselves in this situation. When our patients are involved, it's a different story. We're going into it with the assumption that we're all in there to do the right thing and for the right reasons and to make this better for the patient. But yeah, we don't take that into account when it's in our own house, quote unquote, at the base. And we all have those partners we love working with and those partners we hate working with, right? Like we can all think back in our career and think about some of the best partners and some of the worst partners. And would it have made a difference if I would have said something in that moment?
And I think what we have to do in these moments where it's not stressful, where it's not chaotic, we're not looking back, is if something catastrophic happened today, do you want to be that person that looks back going, man, I wish I would have spoken up? And I think we have to all be kind of united and bought into the little things do really matter, and we can't take any of those for granted. And again, I think if you're not comfortable having that conversation, look towards one of your other partners that you can get advice for. Go to leadership. Like there are obviously there's other ways to do that. I think it goes back to just the that's the normalization of deviance. Like that's accepting mediocrity and just saying, well, it's always been this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way. That infamous phrase. And I just
we've
think
always done it that way.
It's so unique for us because I'm sure there's some other industries out there, but if you really break it down, how many other industries does truly everybody show up that day with the same goal of we all want to take really good care of people and we want to go home safely? And there's not a person, no matter what their role is in the organization, that goes to work that day thinking they want to make a mistake that's going to harm a patient or themselves, or that they, want to have something that leads to a bad outcome. So if we can get through, again, all this is easier said than done, every other little distraction of Bryan just sent me out the 14th system that I've got to log into every day. And, base 3 took that call, should have been a base 1 call. I don't understand why we're going at. Like if we can just, find ways to kind of channel our energy and find that kind of true north on a more frequent basis, we could probably realign on some of it. But Mike, I want to go back to something that you'd said, because I thought it was key. You had mentioned like that, the age-old unhappy referring provider kind of thing. I think that we can use that as an example of where we've grown in the industry, because I wasn't in the industry 2 decades ago, 2.5 decades, 3 decades ago, but I know from just kind of, working with colleagues who have been, and through what I've seen, some of the kind of the growth of the industry, there would have been a day where it would have been like, no, that doctor's upset. Our policy is we get out of here and we figure it out in a helicopter. And I know that my colleagues, because they're calling the AOC, they're calling the medical director, and they're saying like, hey, we're going to kill this patient if we move right now. And what can we do? Is that, a conversation with the AOC and the medical director and the provider, if they've already tried that at the crew level, it's not going. Like, that's a way we've grown. That's a way I think the industry has evolved for the right by doing what's right. And I think you can kind of pivot and draw some parallels to the topics that we've been chatting about in the same regard.
And it highlights that whole, it's not just me, it's not just my partner or just the pilot. It's really that team, and it's that team dynamics. And I'm sure people's heads are going to spin off when you think of like the AHA instructions, and you think about when you have the team dynamics and how, and you do the training for that. But it really does just really help us. Maybe it bridges those gaps in those moments, right? When things are happening, to make those quick, hey, are you sure that's what we should do? Or, hey, do you think maybe I should phone a friend on this, with this patient? Or maybe I should go talk to the pilot, because I know if you and I are kind of thinking maybe the weather isn't, but he's okay with it. can we just go ask, And I think that's great that we, really and embrace the team dynamics aspect of it. And I think, of all the podcasts we've done, we did one with the pilots where, Matt Johnson, he referred to pilots as a meat servo. And we're not just self-loading baggage. I think there's been just such a good change over the years about we all are an integral part of making these patient encounters, these flights, missions, whatever you want to call it.
We can't call it a mission. That's unsafe.
Yeah, I know, right? But we all have such an important aspect. And if any of us are kind of lacking at any point in time, that really leaves us open to maybe something happening. And it doesn't have to be catastrophic. It could be something very minor, but it still could lead to any type of incident. And so I think what's really been great for seeing over the years is that we are all have an important role, and the roles are so important. And when we are all working with integrity, doing the right things when people aren't looking, that our roles really define how we get these patient transports or these patient encounters done successfully, and the patient gets great care, they get where they need to go, and we're supported as a crew. And I feel like it's so important, like the team dynamic aspect of that. But there are times where we notice that maybe somebody or another part of that team dynamics might not be at their best. Like, how do we address, like, I guess that aspect, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and moving forward, like, we want it to be a positive experience, but if we notice that one of us is either faulting or whatever, how do we do that and still recognize and make sure like nobody feels like they were just like dumped on or it was their fault, but we're all integral. We're all an important aspect of that. And so whether it's from leadership or crew, like, how do we really address that and not lose the team dynamic aspect, but really use that to highlight that, hey, we, maybe this didn't go so great, but like, how do we make that improve? And
if you got the secret sauce for that one, Blake, I think we could all use a couple bottles of it for sure.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
I think it goes back to like, those are probably the things that, I mentioned before, like, how do we measure culture? Like what actually helps us know if we have that. And I think that if the environment is if anybody feels the environment's more conducive to that they have avenues, whether it be in like, all right, listen, Blake's worked with Mike for like 10 years. They've been partners. I don't know that I'm the right person to have this conversation, but let me go talk to him and see if, he has some advice for me, or, it's kind of I think that we can't just take acceptance. We can't just throw our arms up and say it's going to be this way. It's not going to change. Those types of things. I don't know that I have another great philosophy or easy low hanging fruit for that.
Hey, I mean, you got to be unwilling to accept mediocrity, right? Unwilling to accept unsafe behaviors. Unwilling to accept cutting corners. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like, I feel like that for the most part is ingrained in most of us coming into this industry, right? Like we are very on top of our game. We feel like we are competent providers, whether that be on the clinical side or competent aviators on the pilot side or competent maintainers. And we are at the top of our game in another area, and we feel like we're ready to take on this particular facet of it, right? Because we've been so accustomed to making sure that we are doing what's right every time to get us to this point. So why are we so willing to accept less than that in others? And I think that that's where the challenge comes in, is that we somehow have to reframe that both on a personal and an interpersonal way to really bring it back to safety. And safety is the overall goal. Like we've talked about, there's no secret in that. But we have to be able to look at it from that objective lens. And whether we're talking about cleaning up after yourself around the base, or we're talking about identifying a major safety issue on a flight, right? Like, you have to have that both personal and interpersonal accountability to step up to the plate and do the thing that needs to be done, or say the thing that needs to be said. And I hope that people do feel empowered for that. I think that that is so incredibly important. And I hope that the precedent is being set from our leaders out there, that is the expectation. And I hope that from a crew level, that the expectation is being set that I'm concerned about all of our safety, and I am unwilling to accept anything less than that, and I'm going to speak up. And I really hope that those two avenues meet in a very happy medium and work very cohesively together. I hate to see when things happen in the industry, and I'm not just talking about crashes, when preventable things go wrong and we didn't catch it or say something ahead of time. And it just takes me again back to the statement of, I don't want to know about a safety event after it happens. And I hope that each of us can take that home and really think about the safety within our own organizations, and how can we continue to push that safety envelope forward. Because I think that if we can't first have that introspect look at ourselves, identify something that you can do personally, I think it's extremely hard to bring it to the organization, because we all play an important part in this. And I think that we need to have that. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our partners, and we owe it to our patients, and we owe it to our families, right? Like, all of these people are counting on us to do the right thing each and every time. And when we accept this deviation, we're moving in the wrong direction. And I know we've all been guilty of it, but I challenge each and every one of us that are listening out there to recognize those small signs and do the thing that you need to do to maintain that personal accountability. Because anything we've talked about at this podcast, the last hour and a half that we've been discussing, has been those minute things that every single one of us has control over. I don't care if you're on the leadership side. I don't care if you're on the crew side. I don't care what role you have. Every single one of us has complete control over every little thing that we've talked about today. Mm-hmm. We need to do better, and we need to continue moving forward and doing the right thing and identifying those positives in the industry.
Maybe, Michael, one of the things that we can frame it as is the connect to purpose, and really helping everybody from day one understand that all those little things matter, not just, does this person good at their walk-arounds, but, that's where that drift can become when we take a little shortcut over here from our daily chore, et cetera. And I go back to, Blake kind of asked from the front, what from the crew can do is, from the frontline crew, like, no leader can be there 24/7, 365, no matter what the size of the organization is. So, Zane, the podcast with Zane talked a lot about, each of us as leaders, and how all the uniqueness of that just on background for people to come here. But that's probably the single biggest thing we could do, is set the example. When a new person comes in the organization, I don't know in the early days how much they're really looking to me to set the tone for safety versus, Mike, you talked earlier about your first flight and looking to those, like, that's what set the tone to you. That was your first experience. That's what you remember. Yeah, and that's probably where we could make sure that we're more solid is, are we the crew member that we want the next crew member to be the one to learn from, and, last throughout their career, take those moments away of, this is the right thing to do. This is why we do it. Those such things.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I could just replay in my head like all the times where I've just wanted to be a little bit lazy, and I've just looked for a way to just have an excuse to be lazy, right? Be like, dude, I've done like 4 flights, man. Like, you know what? I'll restock. I just want to lay down. If I set out this stuff and then I'll put it back, I'll put it back before shift change, but I just want to lay down, and I'm just using it as an example, right? But then what happens? You get that 5th flight, or whatever it is, you get that next flight and now you're scrambling to grab all the stuff that I set it out and then you get in there and you're like, well, I didn't restock the glucometer, or, whatever it is, but you just forget something. And that's those little things. And I can just think of, as we've had this discussion, of all the ways that I can just be better every day by just those small things really add up, just like every pound matters, for the aircraft, like it's all these little small things matter in our day-to-day disciplines. And it may not seem like much, but those little things that we forget could have a larger impact down the road. So I know there's a ton of areas where I can improve. I'm really glad that we've had this conversation. My checklist tomorrow will be spot on.
It better be. And if any one of your partners come to me and say anything differently.
But does your checklist make sense? Or do we need to change the checklist?
Yeah, truth. No, I really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with us, Bryan. I think it's so important to talk about these things. And the more we talk about them, the more we can normalize having these conversations and continuing to push that safety umbrella even larger and larger and make sure that we're actually practicing what we preach. And I love having these conversations because for me personally, it is my daily reminder of the things that I need to be doing. And every time I go back to work, it helps reinforce the processes that I have in place, the policies that are already there, and continues to make me think about safety in a different way. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us, and especially on a topic that is so important. So, thank you again. It's been an awesome conversation and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. And again, it's, I'm walking away. I've definitely, I think what you had said that, you got from your leadership on I never want to hear about a safety event after it happened. Like it's a different way of saying things, but it was immediately impactful with me. And it is something that absolutely, that I'm going to carry forward. So, this is what it's all about, is those, the moments, the collaboration to be able to take it back.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Bryan, thank you again. Hopefully we will see you down at Echo Philly, and hopefully we'll see all of our listeners there as well. This has been an amazing discussion today, and something that we hope that all of you take back to your bases and really start to talk about on a more regular basis. And since I know all of you caught up on the Valor Flight Crew podcast, make sure you head on over to verticalhelicast.com, where you can check out the Hangar Z podcast, Helicopter podcast, Vertical MRO podcast. We really appreciate everybody for tuning in for another week and for your continued support of the Vertical Helicast platform and the Valor Flight Crew podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Valor Flight Crew podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support. Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
As we wrap up this episode, we'd like to thank Bryan Evans for sharing his experience, insights, and perspective on what it truly means to build and sustain a culture of safety. One of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is that safety culture isn't something that exists in a mission statement or a policy manual. It's reflected in the actions we take every day. It's in the standards we uphold, the conversations we're willing to have, and the accountability we accept for ourselves and our teams. Whether you're in the cockpit, the cabin, the communication center, or the boardroom, every interaction is an opportunity to strengthen or weaken the culture around you. Creating safer operations doesn't happen through a single initiative or leadership directive. It happens through deliberate behaviors, open communication, continuous learning, and the courage to speak up when something doesn't seem right. The strongest safety cultures are built by teams that remain vigilant, challenge complacency, and never stop looking for ways to improve. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Valor Flight Crew Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your colleagues and crew members. Together, we can continue advancing the conversations that make public safety aviation safer for our patients, our teams, and our communities. Until next time, stay safe, everyone, and be the culture you expect in others and your organizations.